Today on the Perception and Action podcast, my interview with Greg Souders from Standard Jiu-Jitsu, developing an ecological dynamics approach to martial arts training. So it's time for a call to action. Hi, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. Before we get to today's topic, I want to tell you about my new book, Learning to Optimize Movement, Harnessing the Power of the Athlete-Environment Relationship, available now on Amazon in paperback and ebook formats. This book is the follow-up to my best-selling skill acquisition book, How We Learn to Move. In it, I discuss how we can go beyond learning basic coordination to becoming an elite mover, evidence-based principles for learning and coaching optimal movement. Take your game from proficiency to mastery. Now on to the show. Today, my pleasure to be joined by Greg Souders from Standard Jiu-Jitsu. Thanks for joining me, Greg.
I'm glad to be here, Rob.
So, Greg, I wanted to have you on because you have been very much adopting a lot of the principles of ecological dynamics in a sport that's very opposite to it, and a lot of people, the way people think. So, you have all the images of Bruce Lee making the same punch over and over and repetition and things like that. So I wanted to kind of bring you on to talk about your story and your experiences with kind of moving in this direction. So can I start off, can you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this?
Oh, sure. So I've been sort of a lifelong martial art fan. I was kind of one of those, rough and tumble, troubled kids that like confrontation and like to fight. And, I was anti-authority, that kind of guy. So, the martial arts vibe really resonated with me. And, I watched all the action movies when I was a kid. So, you have that thing inside you, I guess. And as a kid, I always went towards those things. So I looked for boxing gyms and karate gyms, but I was always interested in the fighting aspect of it. I was actually exposed to jiu-jitsu through a series of videos called Gracie in Action. And one of the founding family of the marketed side of our sport was the Gracie family. And they heavily marketed jiu-jitsu to the West. Through these videos. And so what they were doing is they wanted to prove the effectiveness of jiu-jitsu. And so what they did was on these videotapes, they would what's called dojo storming, or they would literally go to other people's academies and say, hey, your martial art is ineffective and I'll fight you to prove it. Oh, wow. And they were doing real fights with these people to show that jiu-jitsu is effective against all forms of martial art. So I saw that and I thought it was amazing. So I was immediately hooked. And so throughout my teenage years, I sort of, I watched UFC, I watched Pride, I watched all the mixed martial art events, and I struggled to find a gym because it really wasn't that popular back in 2000 to 2004, 2005. I didn't find a gym until I was 19. It was actually, I was working two jobs at the time, and a friend of mine from high school came into one of my jobs and was asking me about this gym, and which guided me towards finding one. And first day I walked in, I saw little kids grappling with a uniform on. Mm-hmm. And I thought jiu-jitsu was just fighting. I didn't know there was this like singular grappling aspect to it. Mm-hmm. I saw it and I was like, oh, I want to try that. I did it the next day. I did my first intro class, and I've literally been on the mats every single day since I was 19 years old. I'm 38 now, so 18 years, wow. 19 years. And I absolutely love it.
Yeah, no, I didn't really know a lot about what it was. I've heard the name a million times, and I was looking into it. It's a very interesting martial art, I think. And so I'm assuming you were taught in kind of a fairly traditional way of focusing on technique, or what was that the case? How when you first learned?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So the thing about the jiu-jitsu community is kind of odd is the way it came up. So jiu-jitsu was actually originally, it was an attempt to find out how fighting worked. So Jigoro Kano is the founder of jiu-jitsu, or the judo. Okay. Mm-hmm. So judo and jiu-jitsu essentially mean the same thing. So judo. It's like the way of gentleness, and Jigoro Kano's view was like not just a technique oriented thing, but a thing that you could do with your life. You can make yourself a better person by following this way of gentleness. But jiu-jitsu means the same thing, but it talks specifically about the technique itself. So the efficient way that we move our body, or the yielding way that we move our body to gain the effect that we're looking for. So what he did was he traveled around Japan, and what he realized is that when he would go from gym to gym to gym, they all knew their techniques very well, but he couldn't remember them as he kept switching gyms to try to learn more. So what he did is he developed some what we call principles or concepts that tied these techniques together. And so his big gift to us of a few things was this idea of kazushi. So this, which means destabilization or off balancing. So when he realized that as the body became destabilized in specific directions, it became more easily manipulatable. And so he used that as his central guide to why we do one movement pattern over another. Anyway, long story short, he wanted to challenge that idea. So what he did was he said, how does this exist in a real fight where everything's allowed? And that's how what I do eventually got developed. But because of that, we sort of lost that sense of it. And as it was marketed to people as an activity to do, it's hard to get people to fight in a live way. So you have to find a way to sort of distill it down. And what ended up happening was we started teaching it, or the community started teaching it technique for technique for technique. Right. We lost that core foundation of guided by principles and concepts to uncover why movements work and what situations they work in. So it sort of got lost. So anyway, now we had this tradition of technique. Here's a technique, here's a technique, here's a technique, here's a technique. And then it just, 200 years later, here we are. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's very common in a lot of sports. You lost the why years ago of what's this moves, what is this trying to accomplish? What's the function of this? A lot of times I find myself digging that, making people bring that to the surface really, makes you aware of, these, and I love the idea of coaching to principles. I think that's, it's not new, but I think it's a really, really powerful thing. Yeah.
So we forget that all these actions start with a question. It doesn't start with an answer. We ask ourselves, what's going to happen in this situation? And then that leads to the solutions that we find. And so it's funny that we lose the power of the question and we gain reliance on the answer. And so what's funny, it was the question that got us to the answer, but instead we use the answer to give a new answer. So it's just strange. And I'm not sure how that came up. It's like we lose the beauty of searching because it was the question that got us to search, which got us to find a solution. But again, I think coaches lose that over the time and they forget that process.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely see the same things, I made it just talking to someone yesterday about let's let people be athletes, right? Instead of we forget what it means to be an athlete, like, having all this, adjustability and searching and, all these make creativity, but we make it robotic in a lot of ways. So I'm assuming when you started coaching yourself, did you start or instructing yourself? Did you kind of start with a technical focus too?
I did. I actually came from a gym that was where our instructor read a lot in the field of like deliberate practice. So he was really into like Anders Ericsson. And so, and he was into like all the popular writings by Malcolm Gladwell. And so he sort of funneled all our practice through those lenses. So we did a lot of rote, blocked, high repetition, static drilling. And so that's where I came from. So I did that from 2004 and largely until 2013. So I was inundated with that methodology, but I always could sense that something was wrong with it. Even though I was fully committed and I believed in it, I just always had this uncomfortable feeling with it, because as I started trying to get other people to use this drilling to uncover technique, I saw problems. I saw this junk that we couldn't talk about. And I didn't know how to get that middle stuff to orient into what we would perceive as skilled behavior. I just figured, okay, if we just kept repeating the solution, it would just happen naturally. For some athletes it did, and some athletes it didn't. So anyway, that's what led me to searching for something else. And once I left the team and became my own coach, I felt this deep intellectual responsibility to uncover what was actually happening. So that made me search, and I found you and the scientists surrounding you that talk about this approach.
Yeah. So that was kind of that was kind of the aha moment, or when you started kind of, I think you've slowly and consistently built into this, right? By reading instead, and adding things. Was there, what was the kind of was there a first thing you did with your instruction to kind of try to implement this?
Yeah. So actually, even before, I came across you, and I came across Ian Renshaw and Michael Turby and all these guys that I've learned from. I had a little program before I taught my own school. So I was teaching at this satellite school. And as I started teaching, I just decided I wanted to make the hour more efficient, because I didn't have that much time, because I only taught like 2 classes a night for this group. So the first thing I did was I took about warm-ups, because I realized, well, we're here to learn jiu-jitsu. We're not here to do push-ups and jump around and run around. So that was the first thing I did. I was like, okay, how can I use the movement in our sport to warm up the body. So that was the first thing I started to do. I just changed that cultural constraint to something else. I was like, okay, we're just going to forget about that. The second thing I did is I decided to break up the game into situations. So I was like, well, there's no reason for me to show like, this super specific wrist lock I was like, there's got to be a core here that if we play these games enough, we'll get the most out of our training. So that was the first thing I did. I just took away the warm-ups and I added in situations that I considered to be foundationally relevant. And so I think that was my first foray into it.
Okay. Yeah. I love the warm-ups is one of my bugaboos. I have a lot of people, you have kids doing hurdler stretches and things like 9-year-olds.
Oh my
really?
God.
Right. You really need to do 15 minutes of stretching with a 9-year-old. I don't think so. Yeah.
And especially in certain sports that don't require that level of permanent flexibility.
Yeah. And when you mention games or situations, is that, I encourage everyone to go check out your videos. You have some great video demonstrations. Is that like creating a certain problem, like getting someone off the floor or,
So
yeah.
Jiu-Jitsu is pretty simple in its like mechanics of what we're trying to do. So, really, we want to cause damage to the body using grappling tactics, or we use grabbing a hold of somebody and putting them in a vulnerable state where we can apply pressures to their joints or to their neck that end the fight. Now, we've discovered that there's a relationship between immobility and breakability. So the more immobile you can hold somebody, they become more breakable. And so then the big problem we're all trying to solve is what I call the movement problem. If somebody is able to move a lot, it's hard to hold them still enough to break or strangle them. So, in the games that we play, we orient ourselves around what we call foundational behaviors that allow the players to learn the basic function of their tools as it relates to making their opponent less mobile and more breakable. So again, that would be like the concept that we're searching through, and the games help us search to find how we can orient ourselves to achieve those ends. And there are certain positions or stereotypical alignments that you'll see emerge over and over and over again in the whole game. So I first started to look at what those stereotypical alignments were that you would see emerge across the board, all weight classes, all the time. And we focused most of our training on those positions and achieving them.
Okay. So this, can you give us an example? Is, you do, so you have people in different starting positions and.
For sure. So typically so we can separate the exchanges and the grappling context into 3 macro structures. We have the standing engagement. This is everything that happens before the 2 opponents hit the floor.
Right.
We have the guarded engagement. This is when we hit the floor and neither player has an advantage yet. Basically, the bottom player has their arms and legs in front of the top player, which gives the bottom player a fighting chance. So that's a macro structure. There's many different games you can play in there. Okay. And then we have the final, which is the pinning structures. This is when the top player has gained an advantage over the bottom player by passing their legs, and they're pinning them into the mat, chest to chest or chest to back. So these are the 3 macro structures. So what we would do is we would start students in aspects of these, like we'd play small-sided games within each of these macro structures, starting from what we call connected positions. This is when we are in full contact with each other, and then we're trying to work towards a specific end, right? We're trying to learn something about the engagement, maybe how to stay on top, how to hold our partner down, how to isolate the limbs, how to expose the back, how to expose the neck. Okay. These would be examples of the larger situations that we started.
So you're giving them goals, right? Within a very constrained, purposely constrained, right?
For sure.
So instead of saying, here's the technique for pinning someone, right?
There is no technique for pinning somebody. I mean, even if I do show you a technique, that is a moment in time, that is a snapshot of one time, one guy in history lined themselves up in this specific way to get this specific effect. But even that guy that did it that one way and who prefers to look at it that way does it differently every time he does it. So. Anyway.
And so do you... These kind of common techniques that kind of emerge, do you kind of just allow that person to kind of discover those on their own by giving them different games, or do you kind of try to push them around a little bit with instructions, or
a little bit of both? So what's interesting about our sport is we do have something in our sport. We have aspects of our sport that are very discrete. So when we're talking about twisting, so the arm breaks in 2 ways. We either twist it when it's bent to break it, or we hyperextend it when it's straight to break it. So that there's no other way the arm breaks. I mean, that's it. So because of that discrete or that invariant property of an arm, we can be a little more prescriptive in those areas. So if I were to show someone a technique, the only technique that we would see is those invariant ways to break the arm. So we would line somebody up in a way where they could experience straightening and hyperextending an arm. But the variation comes from their experience with trying to do that. Right. So rather than show them the optimized technique to straighten an arm, we give them the opportunity to exist in that position where they have to attempt straightening an arm while immobilizing their opponent to make that arm more breakable. Okay. And we play games where they get to learn to adapt to the variation present in that system. And so even though it's a very discrete behavior and it can be talked about like prescriptively, it needs to be experienced in an implicit way, because the way you have to orient your body around achieving that end is highly variable, especially for a new player.
Right. Yeah, you need to get into that. Right. Yeah, I could see that in martial arts there's there's a possibility to kind of segment things if things happen sequentially, like, I get you to the floor before I do this move. But I think you're right, breaking them apart too much is gonna not let it experience these moves and what you need to do to get there in the first place. Yeah. For
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, so what we use really is we use like a manifold structure. So the idea is that there are ways that we align the body that we know will make it more manipulatable. Okay. And we call the aspect of this, the concept we use is called physical certainty. So if I align myself up with your body in a specific way, I can be more physically certain of a potential outcome than I otherwise would be. Okay. Just because the way the body moves relative to this task of immobilization is not as complex as we would imagine. So we create these games as sort of like a manifold to guide behaviors in a serial way towards a specific end, but not a serial way in such a way that you have to put your hand here, you have to put your leg here, you have to put your head here. It's more serial in the sense that we're prioritizing certain aspects of the engagement that give us control or more control towards the end that we're looking for.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Would you relate that to kind of a skill intentionality? Like you're kind of manipulating the affordances almost of your opponent and yourself.
For sure.
Yeah. Rather than trying to achieve a specific goal now, you're kind of, you're creating this situation where they're going to be very limited in what their opportunities and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so we want them to focus their attention more closely on the intentions that are going to give them the opportunity to reach their end. So let's say we know that, when you're holding a body down, you're basically manipulating two states of the human body. We're manipulating states of extension and we're manipulating states of contraction. So as the body resists pressure, it goes through these two states. It extends to create force forward and push people away, and it contracts to protect the center. So we wanted the player to learn as they interact with the bottom player, for example, to immobilize them. They need to learn what extension feels like or what contraction feels like. They need to experience the affordance of compressibility towards pressurability, towards graspability, to extendability, to contractibility. These are things that we pick up. I mean, beginners who've never grappled pick these up. They respond to it, but their attractors are not effective because they're, as a regular human, not a grappler. And so anyway, so yeah, we want them to experience those affordances.
I like that a lot. I think I like your approach. I like we sometimes I think in dynamical systems and we get overly focused on the mechanics and the dynamics without recognizing the bio part of it, right? It's constrained by anatomy. Like I think you gave great examples there. The movement solutions are constrained by our anatomy. It's not just any open dynamical space. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's very objective facts about arms. I mean, the way we describe it, when we paint the model. So again, the model we know is a lie, but the model is a way that we can, it's almost like an analogy for, using analogy. So when you teach someone, imagine like you're swinging the racket like it's a rainbow.
Yeah.
Well, we're trying to help people understand that the periphery are levers. Okay. So we pull and push on them like we would any lever, right? So this helps us experience alignment. So we know that levers that are long, when you go to the end, produce more force at the base than if they're shorter. So this helps us look at, interacting with the wrist or interacting with the elbow to specifically affect the shoulder. So it's sort of an analogy, right? So we call it a 7-lever system. Okay. You have 2 legs, 2 arms, a spine, shoulder, and hips, and each have an effect on center mass, which is the ultimate goal. We need to get to the center of the body, because if I can attach to your hips and shoulders, I can immobilize you greatly. So anyway, this is the objective fact about the body. And so we try to orient our students around experiencing this objective quality and searching for ways to manipulate it without being told this is the perfect technique or alignment.
Okay. Yeah, no, I really like that. I like again, kind of principles focus. And and so when you're doing these kind of activities, do you do kind of some instruction about that first before you do the games and kind of have them both build on each other?
For sure. So a brand new class, we always start with definitions. People have to know what the guard is. Since we're using a indirect term, okay, because the guard has no relevance. It doesn't, give us direct information. So what we tell them is what the guard is, and then we tell them this is its function. So in this game, we're going to try to produce this outcome utilizing this function. So if we know the guard, its main job is it's when you're laying on your back or you're on the bottom and you're aligning to the top player with your hands and feet. Its foundational function is to manage distance, because the bottom player is weak to pressure. So we have to make sure that pressure can't get to us and hold us still. So our guard is a way that we connect to the top player and we stop them from getting close. So that's its foundational function. So then the game that we initially play relates to making connection to the top player against their objective, which is to get to our chest, for example. And we have to perform the function of holding them at bay. And so that's all. So that's all we have to start with. Here's the situation. This is what it's called. This is the function we're looking for. Here's the game. Let's try to understand how to use our limbs towards this end objective. Let's go.
Okay.
And that's
Good.
it.
And nothing, nothing, no reference to the body or solution or, or how you're going to get there. Right. Just kind of orienting a person to, I guess, a lot of it I would put in the education of intention, right? Kind of been.
Correct. Yeah. So I read a lot of Gabrielle Wolf, and I like the way that she frames the intention and attention idea. And I've also heard other neuroscientists say that the chemistry of the brain that helps reinforce learning is based on those two things. That we have to know what we're intending to do, and we have to know where to look, or we have to know where to focus our intention. And so once we can create an opportunity for the learner to have both an intention and focus of attention, we start to get more learning happening. And so we always start with that. What is our intention, and where are we focusing? And so that's a core feature of how I'm designing every game that we play.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I don't think we vary intentions enough in in training. We tend to do the same general thing, hit the ball, instead of really something, giving them, so I like that a lot. So you yourself, you've kind of I know I've talking to you before, you've dove right into dynamical systems and continue to kind of build your understanding. How important do you think that is, like learning the theory and really diving into that to be able to do this?
Well, it's incredibly important because again, what you guys are doing, what you researchers are doing, is you're telling us something objective about the world, and us as people applying it have to explore what you're telling us. So, I know that you guys use a specific language because you're a scientist arguing with a scientist. You're trying to define things so deeply that you try to poke holes in each other's argument to really uncover what's happening. But anyway, so we don't have to go that deep. We just have to try to apply your abstract. What are you saying is happening? And so, I think it's critical, because if you and I are speaking the same language, then when you say something to me, it's more relevant to me if I understand what you're saying. And then it becomes easier for me to apply the principles and concepts that you're trying to share through your abstractions. So again, I think it's very important. And I try to convince people, you have to know the language. We're talking about objective facts about reality here. These terms are not just jargon. These are definable terms that link us directly to something true about the world, or seemingly true, or at least statistically important. I mean, chop it up however you want. We got to speak the same language.
Yeah, no, I know there's always this controversy about this, but I know you are, whether we're just throwing a lot of big terms around to sound smart, and they're really, but I obviously I 100% agree with you. They have definition. Once you start learning using the language, like using the word constraint, like it's meant to be used, and it tells you about something about what you're doing and kind of helps link things together. So that's so you, with your athletes, you're using kind of these terms and getting them to feel comfortable with them.
Absolutely. So again, I do it at multiple levels. So with the beginners, all they need to know is the language of jiu-jitsu, because they're learning how to play a game. So they have to know the basic alignments, the things that the community has agreed upon, that everyone uses. So this helps them just kind of orient with their community and orient around the game. I don't start talking about the science with them until they're curious about it. Because again, I don't think it's necessary for them. I mean, I heard one time John Wooden said a good coach hides his intentions within the practice. And so I try to do that because I want my students to focus on what they're trying to develop and not trying to understand something that they're not going to use anyway. Yeah. I think the language of ecology is more important for a coach than it is for a student, unless I'm using some term to communicate with my students. So again, I try to do it at both levels. I mean, my more advanced students, we always sit around and geek out over ecology because we love it. Like because it's changed the way we look at the body too. It's not just, an interesting science. It actually really changes the way you perceive action. It changes the way you perceive engagement. It really does. It has an effect on you once you understand it, or at least you think you do. So,
yeah. Well, can you talk a little bit more about that? Is it, I'm thinking of it as an interaction more and more symmetrically? Is that kind of what you mean, that it changes the way you perceive?
Yeah. So two things that happened to me when I learned these concepts, and it almost was like shocking. When I learned about what invariance was, and when I learned about what degeneracy was, because these two things are very relevant for us as grapplers. So an example is, if we're in a standing situation, immobilization has a huge effect once I get the hips on the ground. So the hips are the seat of power and the seat of balance. We move our hips through connection with the floor. So if I put your hips on the floor, I've done most of the destabilization that's going to occur as it relates to starting to immobilize you. And so that is what we would call an invariant. It's an invariant feature of the human body as it relates to staying mobile or producing power. And so once I started looking for those. Okay, well, that's the first one. And then degeneracy was important because the question then becomes, how many different ways can I line up my structure to achieve this end? Right. How many different ways can I solve the problem, or we call it the hip degeneracy? How can I put those hips down on the floor in as many varied ways as possible? And then, so again, what that did was it informed me about something true about the human body, understanding the concept of invariance. And then by looking at how biological systems organize in different ways or similar ways to create a repeated effect, that immediately made me see something. And so then I could orient my practice better around what tasks should take priority over another. So again, if we are playing the game of immobilization, then if we find invariant features about the human body that immobilize it better than others, then most of our practice design should be geared around helping the body organize around doing that behavior.
Okay.
Does that
yeah, 100%. Yeah. So that's exactly what the way I think about a lot of those sports I do, baseball. There's these kind of facts of movement, of anatomy and movement, and there's these invariant properties and coaching around those and to those. And I think giving you lots of capacity to get to those, through different movement I think that's exactly the way I like to think about it. I think I've talked about it. I don't think everybody agrees. I think some people kind of just let the kind of solutions emerge by just giving problems. But I think having it guided around some central principles about anatomy and movement, I kind of like to, and that sounds like what you do as well. You have some kind of guiding principles. Yeah.
Well, I actually noticed something. So we say this thing to each other, like if ecology is real, it's real all the time. So you're always affected by the task environment, individual system. You're embodied. It says no matter what you do, it's going to you as a human interacting with the world is going to produce an effect. So at a baseline, if you take a bunch of guys and you give them a bunch of problems and you put them in a room, you solve these problems, you're going to get something out of it because that's how it happened historically. But what we know is if we look at the historical movement record, efficient movement solutions are slow to emerge over time. And you have these blips of like really smart movement historically that has solved problems greatly. Like you can think about the Fallsbury flop. Like when everyone was jumping over the high bar, they were all repeating each other's motion. But this one guy comes over and he says, hey, if I jump over backwards, I can use an arc to increase height. So then you're like, oh, great. So then everyone starts doing it. But these are slow. Right? They just emerge randomly. However, if you study the human body and you try to become an expert in its how it comes up with movement solutions in this specific way, then we can start focusing our attention on things that might produce that novel solution more readily. And so then you gain a little bit more control as it relates to the speed of skill acquisition. So even though we need to be solving many problems, solving them in a guided fashion based on some objective knowledge about the environment sort of speeds up that skill acquisition process.
Yeah. No, 100%, Greg. I really like that way you put it, the guided, when I've been talking about some coaches, the worry is if you're just really going to use this approach, really an analyst could design practice, right? If it's all just about creating problems for an athlete, all I have to do is identify what you're weak at and design practice. But I still think the coach as the guide is still incredibly important. It's short, like I like the way you put that too, shortening the search, right? Maybe they would come up with this, probably, right, over a long period. But if you, with your knowledge of these invariants and things like that, I think you can guide people to things quicker.
Yeah, we talk about, and I read this once too, like I think maybe Carl Newell, I don't know who said this, but they said the coach has two responsibilities: one, to teach what's invariant, and two, to allow freedom for new movement solutions to emerge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I took this seriously. So what that means to me is that historically we gain knowledge about, right? Mm-hmm. So what we can do as coaches, we can use knowledge about to enhance the new student search to gain knowledge of. And our goal is to get them to where we are as quickly as possible. So in all sports, we had this edge of certainty. Like, what's possible now? How much further can we go? So I think the trick for coaches is to try to educate their student within their sport, the sporting context, to get to that edge as fast as possible. Because that's what we're trying to do. We want to keep pushing everything forward. And I think that's really the goal, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel every time we want to build a car, right? Yeah. We want to get to the modern technologies now. And so what we realize historically, there's a lot of junk in that record that we can just cut out. And so it's paying attention to not only what's happening daily with your students, but what happened historically as people learn these behaviors in the specific realm. And again, we just take it seriously from all levels. We can create practice designs that help our students learn these skills, not only to become more adaptable, but also have them acquire these skills at a faster rate. So anyway.
Yeah. And I think, focus, turn the coach side of things as well. I think you can see with you, in your original example of the jiu-jitsu, the person, they had knowledge about all these different techniques, and then actually coaching them and interacting with them, they realize these principles. So I think your knowledge is changing as well, right, as a coach, by trying, implementing these games and observing your athletes as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Someone asked me, like, what's the most important thing you do when as far as gaining new knowledge? And I was like, watching my students. I mean, that's been invaluable, because what I get to see is the effect of my constraints as they relate to skilled outcome. And if I'm paying attention, I can see something there. And because just like a performer adjusts to his environment and task and individual constraint in real time, I'm a coach doing that same thing.
Yeah.
So when you shared the studies with observer trying to perceive the affordance of the performer, that was very convincing for me. I was like, oh, this is amazing, because I feel like I can do that. Like I feel that that's true because I'm experiencing it. But anyway, it's paying attention to my own room as it relates to the constraints I'm setting and the skilled outcome that really helps change the way I see not only coaching, but the sport itself, because I too am interacting with it from a third party's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. You're getting knowledge of for coaching, right? You're interacting with the environment, and instead of just learning a whole bunch of facts about jiu-jitsu and, holds you can read in a textbook, seeing how these things emerge as you manipulate constraints. I think it's just so powerful, but you have to kind of be open to, observing and kind of not stepping in all the time and things like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, for sure. I mean, I think I tell my students that we're attractor finders. So like a coach is an attractor finder. Like, that's what we're looking at all the time. We're trying to see, what effectivities are emerging and why. We're trying to see what's sticking, what's not sticking, what works well in one situation, but all of a sudden doesn't in the next, and how can we change that? So again, this is what we're really doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know, and the other thing, Greg, I know you've talking with you, you've been a big proponent on kind of representativeness in the practice, right down to what people are wearing, right, when they were in your gym. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
For sure. And this was very true to me, because jiu-jitsu is expressed in two ways. We have what's called no-gi jiu-jitsu, or now being referred to as submission grappling. And then we have what's called gi jiu-jitsu, where we use a uniform. And I came from a gi jiu-jitsu background, meaning all my skills as a grappler stabilized while wearing cloth. Now, what happened is when I started exploring the no-gi environment, because historically I was a gi guy. That's what, for 12 years, I got my black belt with the uniform on. That's what I wanted to be. That's what I wanted to do. But I decided to explore the other side of it. And right when I took the jacket off and I got a chance to train with some no-gi professionals that only ever train no-gi. It was horrible. I was getting beat so badly. It's almost like I didn't grapple. I mean, I had a general sense for what's going on, but I was behind every exchange. And that really made us, it like, in my mind, it made things very obvious. When you grapple with the jacket on, because of the strength of cloth around the body, you learn to manipulate the body with the cloth. Right. You don't manipulate the body with the body, because the cloth does a lot of the work for you. Wherever the cloth is touching and connected is going to control that aspect of the body as we pull and push and tug on it. So we start to attune to this information to create relevant movement solutions. So I didn't realize that because I didn't know anything about this. But then I realized, oh my God, I can only do things with a jacket on, and also when you take it off, everything goes faster. You get sweatier. Things change. So anyway, these affordances will literally affect every movement that comes out of you. Okay. You attune in a different way. So anyway, I'm very picky about that. Yeah. Representativeness for me is a real thing. It really affects how skillful you can become.
Yeah. No, I think that's an excellent example. I always say, people are really efficient learners. We're going to if you give me a shortcut or a different way to achieve something, I'll probably take it, right? Being pulling on your jacket, yeah. So, but then but then you get the transfer problems when it goes away. You've learned a solution that doesn't transfer well. Yeah,
it's really bad too, and a lot of people didn't see it because what was happening is the no-gi environment wasn't very popular. So you had a bunch of guys who trained with the gi on, taking their gi off, and then fighting in the no-gi situation. So it didn't seem that different. But then now we have a whole group of guys over the last 20 years that have only been grappling in the no-gi way. And now when you see a gi guy take their jacket off and they go to grapple with that professional environment, they look like novices. Yeah. And so now, since we have these two start camps, we can see that difference. So it helps us understand that, representativeness is really an important thing if we're talking about high-level skilled athletes.
Yeah. I think that's a great example, and also it's not just something, on the surface you could say it seems superficial what you're wearing, but it has a direct effect on it's a task and it changes the constraints. And so I think that's a great way to look at representativeness. So Greg, you're doing moving into some kind of coach education stuff yourself. Kind of what do you have some kind of thoughts or advice people that want to kind of start moving in this direction, not necessarily just in martial arts, but kind of any coach? I know it's a big question. I know. Sorry.
It's easy. First, you want to read How We Learn to Move by Rob Gray. You also want to learn to optimize movement.
I'm being dead serious. Checks in the mail.
This is what I tell everybody because it's real, Rob. I mean, you've done me a great service, and it's the way you communicate too. Here's what's funny. I was telling my guys this when I got your book, How We Learn to Move. I got irritated because I followed your YouTube since episode 79, and I painstakingly listened to every single one, and I would go to the papers that you referenced and I read it all. Even when I messaged you, I emailed you, and you gave me the college textbooks that I should look at. I think it was the acquisition of skill, or motor performance, whatever. I read all those, and then I got through it all. I was utilizing, I was applying it, and then your book came out. And what was really funny is your book, chapter for chapter, is almost the path that your YouTube channel took. And so it's how you organize the information. And I was like, oh my God. So to me, that was really a good thing because the way you organize it on your YouTube is almost exactly how you organize it in your book. And I felt like I was getting the same information from both sources. So for me as a learner, I really felt like the information you were delivering was not only clear, but relevant. So I recommend everyone to read your stuff because that helped me so much.
Thank you,
next thing is, of course, man, you're welcome. I'm being dead serious. I tell everybody this. And then after that, you have to apply it, guys. You have to go through the trial and error as the coach. You have to commit to the process. You have to try to adapt the information. You have to try to understand what these words mean and why these words are important. And it will change the way you see the environment. The perception action link is real, even as coaches. Yeah, I mean, again, learn as much as you can, apply as much as you can, be open to self-correction and constantly explore until you get the outcome you're looking for.
No, I really like that. And well, it sounds like you maybe start with one activity or one, people that want to kind of cling on to the explicit skill and drill kind of techniques? Do you just kind of get them to try? Why don't you try one thing, or is that kind of approach used, or do you? Yeah,
it's been hard convincing people. I mean, there are kind of two things that I get. So I get, okay, it's always worked this way. You're a new coach. You don't know what you're talking about. We're going to keep doing it this way. Okay, fine, no problem. And then you get the other, and this is what's interesting. It's actually the beginners, the people that are like from new to a few years in that I resonate with more than the people who've been doing it for a while. I have white belts being like, oh my God, when I hear you talk about this, it makes you look so clear to me. I want to use your method. So anyway, so I don't know how to convince people, man.
Yeah.
Because to me, this information is so clear. I mean, when I read Michael Turvey's Self-Organization, I sat there like my whole life is a lie. So it was such an effect for me. So I don't know. But the other thing that I do is I ask people to come to my gym, come experience it for yourself. When you've been training in a traditional method for 10 to 15 years and you come in and you get beat up by somebody who's been training for 2 years or less, if that's not convincing, I don't know what else to tell you, man.
Yeah.
So anyway, try it yourself. You will be pleased with the results.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly the same thing I do, right? Like, let's gamify this a little bit, even if, and I think your point about coming to, it's hard not to, especially on social media and the way we present this, like it's just, okay, here's a new drill Greg created that you add. Right, it's a whole new way to think. Right, it's a whole system of thinking, and so it's hard to convey that with just seeing a short video on YouTube or something like that. Yeah,
I mean, it really is because these games that I'm sharing are games that I've used historically, but I don't always use them in the same way. So the thing is I think the magic is how the coach adjusts the practice.
Yeah,
it's not because learning is specific to each individual. I start with an extreme form of generalism. Like I try to keep it as general as possible, but only to get started. Because what we realize is in sport, there are some behaviors that are going to be the same across the board. And that's playing the game, right? So we have to get people to play the game. But as we get them to play the game, we're going to have to adjust practice to each individual or to a groups of individuals. As we see movement solutions emerge or tractors develop, we have to change things. And so it's how we manipulate the games ultimately. That's the real skill.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I'm telling people. We can't replace technique with game. Okay. I mean, at a base level, we can. You're gonna get because it's representative and you're having them react against real resistance. So that's beneficial. But again, everyone changes every day. It is software, not hardware. So if you're not constantly updated, things start to dissolve.
Yeah.
And they dissolve against novelty too. So remember, as people learn, new novel things come up, and we have to be updating against that novelty. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think there's a couple. I've been saying this, I think, a few times on the pod. I've from watching a bunch of really good coaches lately. My phrase was, "The art of coaching is what you do next." Right? Anybody can watch a drill and set up a drill, but when I watch really good coaches, what they do in response to how the athlete in front of them reacts to the drill or takes up or forwards or move, that's. Wow. It seems the easy, but it's really hard to kind of get developed. Yeah, it's a skill you have to develop like anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's the information us as coaches are attuning to.
Yeah.
So if an athlete attunes to, affordances for graspability and pressure ability, I think a coach needs to attune to affectability. So how are you affecting your athlete? Because, an informational constraint to one student will be groundbreaking, but to another, you have no relevance at all. Or, one game structure might help one student pick up the affordances necessary to complete the action, but for the other, it won't. So again, that's really serious. And that's the hardest thing about coaching. And it takes investment in your students, and it takes investment in also criticizing yourself. And I think a lot of coaches kind of want to revere themselves and they don't want to self-criticize. And so I think these are some of the pitfalls that I find when interacting with other coaches.
Yeah, no, it's something I've found is one of the big challenges of this is kind of giving up that coaches that knows everything view of the world. It's tough for people, and taking a more humble view. I think that's a really good thing. And I like the, it's not just replacing drills with, technique drills with games. The games are not just, but I also like, you right at the start, you said you wanted to fight, right? You didn't come to learn not the putting down dance anyway, but dance moves, right? Like you wanted to interact. But I think most athletes are like that. They came to compete and play and not learn body positions, right?
I actually love that you're saying that because, you not being in the field, not being in the community and, we play a hard game. We cannot forget that we are fighting.
Yeah.
And this is the truth. So if you don't like getting sweaty and hot and uncomfortable and nauseous and having someone squeeze your face into the mat, the sport of grappling might not be for you. So I want to let people know that right away too. So again, I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to damage yourself. I mean, because again, it is a tough and rough and tumble sport. But again, fighting is what we're doing. And you have to experience what a fight feels like because it's relevant to all of our action. Getting someone comfortable with, quote, the kata or the dance move or the sequence of events. Yes, this could be stimulating in some way for some individuals, but it's not really fighting. Mm-hmm. So you have to really define, do you want to just perform the preordained actions that look like what we're doing, or do you want to do what we're actually doing? And you just, as a learner, you have to really define your place. And be honest with
not that there's anything wrong with either one, but I think, you having the intention again in mind. So that's really great. I think that's good advice. The biggest one's trying, and talking to I'm talking to other coaches and getting through their experiences of what they tried and what might have worked, but you got to try it yourself in at some point. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if we tell our students they have to try and fail to succeed, then coaches have to try and fail to succeed. We have the same pressures because, again, it's a skill. Yeah, we are battling with the psychologies and physiologies of the people we are interacting with. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to change those two things. I mean, training is designed to have an effect on the organism for a specific outcome, and so we as coaches are the designers of that effect. And so we are not masters of both the student in front of us and the component parts of that design and how they affect that student. Then we aren't coaches. We're not coaches.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way to put it about it. So just to kind of wrap things up, Greg, where's a good place to people to go to find your stuff? I know you have a lot of the things you've been talking about, the games and the kind of activities you do there. You have a lot of great videos that I know that really show this really well. Where can people go to find your stuff?
So I tell everyone to just follow us on Instagram. So, at GD Souders or at Standard Jiu-Jitsu. Okay. That's where we're putting all of our free content. We're doing all kinds of free work, and I interact with everyone who messages me. So, I mean, the Standard account, don't message that because I have another guy helping me. So if you want to talk to me, you have to, G Souders, you have to come, or GD Souders. I don't know even know what my Instagram handle is.
I'll put a link in the notes for this. So if anyone
so come find me, ask me questions. I'm doing a lot of free work. So for the last 6 months, I've been doing 4 to 8 hours of messaging and calls a day. I have literally taken a chunk out of my day to try to spread this information. And I wanted to make it as accessible as possible so people can start to hit the ground running. So the first people I was trying to communicate with are people that are willing to do the work like myself, because that's what I did. I digested the material. I got to application. I did trial and error. I figured it out. So if you're one of those people, message me. I'll help you. I'll guide you. I'll do whatever I can. So please contact me that way. That's the best way.
Yeah. That's great. That's great, Greg. Really generous of you, and I know I get a lot of, and I'm always really happy to kind of help people get move in this direction. So, but that's really generous of you with your time, and like I said, I would really recommend. We had an interesting, like you said, you were following, we had one interaction via email, but I kept getting people mention your name to me. I've have some people that I work with in martial arts and things. They kept mentioning your videos and things. So, you kind of bubbled up in my attention as well. So, those are great resources. So thanks for joining me, Greg.
Oh, you're so welcome, Rob. It was fantastic talking to you and meeting you and learning from you. And so this is great for me. So thank you again for having me on your channel. And just thanks for everything.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including a monthly coaches meetup, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep 'em coupled.